So I think I'm going to start this off this way. This is a phone, but why do we call it a phone? Because I've had this for 3 days. I haven't made a phone call on it. Most kids who have phones never make phone calls on it. And I think going forward, we're going to make fewer and fewer phone calls on these devices, which are in effect just pocket computers. And so as these devices become more prevalent in our lives and in effect start to become our primary computing device, the issues of what they look like physically, what the user interface is going to look like, and then what the content on top of it is going to have to evolve and change in ways that we haven't yet thought through completely. And so I have, to my immediate right, Claude Zellweger, who is the principal and chief designer for One & Co., which is now owned by HTC and doing some fabulous design work for them. To his right is Albert Shum, who is primarily responsible for the user interface and look and feel of Windows Phone. And to his right is Felix Peterson from Nokia, who is Chief of Product Strategy for Ovi. They're increasingly successful online. Well, you describe Ovi.
Should I now? Okay.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Right, Ovi is the line of services of Nokia. It's our own brand for the services that run on the mobile phone, reflecting, the fact that increasingly what we do on our phones is, it's the interesting thing, not so much the hardware itself anymore. So Nokia recognized it a couple of years ago and did Ovi, which initially was a bunch of different services. People probably know Ovi Maps, Ovi Music, Ovi Messaging, and now increasingly that is actually coming together around what I would call context and being increasingly consolidated and increasingly successful. Of course, also Ovi Store, which is basically our app store, our way of distributing apps for Nokia phones.
Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about how you wound up at Nokia and some of and what exactly you do as head of product strategy?
Well, actually, I would more call it product concepting. So basically, I had a small company called Places, which was doing location-based services. Basically, all of us know Foursquare today now, but we started a little earlier. It was 2004, and then eventually we got acquired in 2008 and integrated into this really great Berlin site that Nokia has, which is essentially around location and maps. It came out of another acquisition called Gate 5, and this is where we got integrated. So, when I first started, I felt that strategy at Nokia was a lot around, producing slides. So, how sometimes designers say they sketch in code. What we wanted to do is sketch, strategy also in code, and just kind of build the strategy and see basically what we have, because Nokia has so many great assets. Just the data. We heard it before. The kind of data that mobile phones create every day. There's so many exciting things you can design around it. So many exciting services. And we wanted to, what my group tries to do is, sketch that strategy in code and build apps. It's not research, it's really just the kind of things that are maybe 1 year out and trying to show what you can do with these kind of services.
So Albert, you joined Microsoft from Nike. What were you doing at Nike and how did you wind up at Microsoft? Because the two don't really seem like they have a whole lot in common.
Sure they do. Come on. What do you mean? It's like it's shoes, phones.
Is there a Nike phone in the pipeline that you want to announce?
Yeah. But it's actually pretty similar in that sense. I think at Nike, one of the things we always cherished was, the consumer decides. It's the end user is king. I think that's why I really took to heart at Microsoft that, and working on the phone. I think it's really a new beginning for us. Is that we really focus on end user and what is that experience. And I took all that learning from Nike and to make the products for the best athletes in the world to how do you make the best products for all the consumers around the world and really focus on that. And that's a big shift for us. And hopefully the phone that we just did is just a start. And we got a lot more ideas. And how do you keep on making it better for the consumers? I think if you do that and you make a great experience, that's how you make a great product. So.
That's very un-Microsoftian.
I know, come on. No, it's. I think like we talk about apps, we talk about the web. At the end of the day, what I love is we're really in this kind of like you said, this big shift that's going on right now. People talk about the Internet 2.0. Reality is, people just want their lives to make it easier, right? Make things work. And I look at it more from a product lens. It's that. It's a productization. A phone should just work as easy as your KitchenAid, Cuisinart, your toaster, your appliances. It's you just turn it on, it should just work. And getting back to that basic, I think it should be as simple as putting a pair of shoes on. So if you can do that, we're succeed.
From the folks that brought you the blue screen of death.
It's a big shift.
It's been a long time since they've done that. Claude, go ahead. I had the pleasure of seeing some of your demos before CES, and so tell us a little bit about some of the designs that you guys are working on and how you're thinking about the way phones are going to be used going forward.
Sure. Just to give you a little bit of background, I've been working as a design consultant in the Bay Area, having my own consultancy for about 7 years before we did the first project with HTC, and that was the Touch Diamond. And it really, back then, nobody really knew the company, and the whole goal was to put the company on the map as far as being a design-driven company, and not go with a sort of haphazard effort, but do something very strong. And that being a relatively big success, we then got acquired 2 years later, and so since then, I've been leading, the effort of kind of putting HTC, or keeping HTC sort of at the forefront of smartphones. But I think you touched on something interesting at the beginning about that. I really think we need a new name for smartphones because, first the words phone shouldn't be in there, and then the other thing is that I think smart is not the correct term yet. I think our phones. We like to attribute human-like qualities to things that kind of have similar behaviors like humans. Mm-hmm. But I think our phones are intelligent at best right now. But I think in order to get smart, phones have to be able to anticipate what you're about to do, not just help you. They have to be able to know you a lot better. And I think this is where it's going to be really exciting to see where the phone development goes. Of course, I'm a hardware designer. So my focus is more on the sort of the physical aspect, but it's you cannot divide what's going on the screen.
Yeah, true. I think it's in terms of collaboration with hardware and software, it's making the product and like a lot of ideas we talk about in terms of not just what's on the screens, but it's also what's the world around you, and your phone is your companion. It's the thing that you wouldn't leave home without it these days. Where would you leave home? Oh, I can't leave home with my phone. But it's how you take this companion. And how do you take it with you in different contexts? So it knows you're in Munich, it knows that you just came from Seattle, or Claude just came from Switzerland. How do you take those shipping contexts and sense the world around you with the hardware, and take those input and bring those intelligence into new experiences, be it just presented before talking about mobile payments. Those are just technologies, but how do you make it make sense for the consumer and make it seamless? I think that's a challenge for designers to solve those problems.
What are sort of some of the things that, clearly one of the things that many of us in the room will remember from, if you're of a certain age, is when Windows first came out and we moved from command line to actual Windows and started using a mouse and started being able to drag windows all over the place. It changed the way we actually used computers and thought about what we could do on them. Today, screens are increasingly touch sensitive, and I suspect that there'll be an equally large shift in terms of how we all use computers as a result of that. What are sort of some of the ways that you guys are thinking about taking things forward as a result of that? Go ahead, Albert.
It's so cool like, in terms of, actually the next panel, I've been talking to those guys around augmenting reality. I think touch it's really making content and your interaction just more immediate. It's like things like Connect, Surface. How do you also make it more natural? It's voice. I think all those ways for you to interact, those interfaces, it will become more and more natural. And like touch, you're actually learning a whole new gesture, pinch, zoom. It's like, that's like a whole new way. Like today, if any app, you expect to be able to like touch it. And that's just gonna be a whole new vocabulary for us to interact with. Whereas I think the keyboard and mouse, that was back in, I think, 66, Douglas Engelbert, SRI. Like that metaphor has been around, the whole idea of a desktop, where you take the desktop and put it on your computer and you got like your garbage can, you got your file cabinet. And that virtualization, I think that metaphor it's kind of gone, and I think we're actually approaching a whole new metaphor about how do we interact with information and touch and natural user interfaces. Those are the things that's going to propel new experiences.
Felix,
right.
what does that have to do about like the content? Go ahead.
Right now, basically, the phones are optimized. The design for the phones, so the touch interface, it's very much optimized for sort of the first wave of real mobile internet that we've been seeing, which is consumption, right? Which is really consuming the internet in the browser and just transporting the kind of things that we've done on the desktop to the mobile phone. But in fact, what's happening now, the next step is basically we're using these phones to create context all the time, right? All the sensors are basically constantly on, and you see it happening now. We'll be constantly interacting because basically this is, it's augmenting constantly what we have around us, and it's also taking a slice of reality and sharing this with others, creating context. And if you see already now what's happening, people constantly staring on their screen, that metaphor, it's kind of approaching its end. It doesn't scale. We will need to come up with other smarter things to for example, capture context, whether it's the kind of noise in the room around us. And there's a lot of things when you combine that sensoric data that you can. I wouldn't go as far as saying it's smart, because that's the wrong thing. I don't want our phones to outsmart us. But if there's a lot of people around me, and if there's lots of noise around, probably in a public setting, right? And this is the kind of thing that we can digest today without asking you. Today, all of this is a setting, right? All of this is one glance at the screen, and that doesn't work going forward unless we all want to look at our screens while we talk to each other.
One of the Claude, can you talk a little bit about the intangibles here? I mean, like one of the things that is you and I talked a little bit on the phone, and you talked about the intangibles of designing hardware that is so personal. What are sort of some of the things that you think about when you're designing phones for people? I mean, because in effect you're designing something that you're designing fashion.
Absolutely. I mean, we kind of think of three areas in which us as designers were really driven and influenced, and the first ones are the obvious ones, which is technology. The displays are going to change, batteries will improve. Those are sort of very obvious things that will have an effect, and also will also make new leaps in terms of hardware technology. And the second one is behavior, and a lot of what Albert talked about is really the behavior. It's also where, as designer, even industrial designer, we can add a lot of value, because if I think about smartphones, they're kind of like black holes. They just absorb other industries, whether it's or other types of products, whether it's a camera, music player, video player, etc., GPS device. They just get absorbed into the mobile phone. I think every time this absorption takes place, there is a need for for the hardware also to respond to it. And because I think, when we want the photo experience on the phone to be as good as it is on a camera ultimately. Right now we're making compromises. But I think the last point, and the one that you were really talking about, is the intangible one, which is because we spend so much time with the phone, there's something that's so much of a reflection of our lifestyle, of our person. It's very important that we almost create a personal bond with the device. And I think things that come into play is the touch and feel of the phone. It's the thing that sometimes, I would say half of it, you can experience when you go into the store and you can feel, and it feels good, the weight is right, and so on. But then it's over the extended use that you can really evaluate whether you sort of get attached to the device. And just to finish that, I think this is where, particularly at HTC, we've been really trying to push the envelope a little bit on manufacturing processes, because I think we have to kind of rethink the way a phone is built. Rather than thinking of it, there's a display in the front, and we get to design, the other sides. We kind of think of it much more in a 360 way, and try to come up with attributes that make it very good, very rigid, very, very pleasant.
Yeah, I think that an area that Claude and I, actually a lot of designers think about, it's personalization. I think, how do you make it more personal and deep personalization, and both in terms of manufacturing, in terms of mass customization. How do you make a phone just for you, Fred, or your phone should be different than my phone? It shouldn't just be one phone for everyone. How do you create that, not just in terms of the hardware, but also in the software? And how do you personalize it so that it understands your context? That's, to me, being personal, being always connected. Those are the things that makes it smarter. It's not smart, but it is more about you than someone else.
All right. I think we're done talking here. Why don't you guys jump in? Why don't we go to the audience for some questions? Because we got about 4.5 minutes, so that probably gives us time for 3 or 4. Who wants to go first? Don't all stand up at once. Go ahead in the front.
Hi, Mark Kramer from Yasu. I haven't heard any talk about users in terms of, let's say, what is it that the users really want besides personalization? What's the next stage?
I think one interesting aspect that maybe when we always talk about me and the phone, and of course it's a very intimate relationship, but there's also one other interesting dimension, and it's the us, right? It's what all the kind of data points that we're creating together with our phones can draw a really interesting picture. So right now it's about how do I use a map, right? But the map of Munich that I have on my phone today is very static, right? The question is, in the future, if everybody uses the map at the same time, well, the map all of a sudden becomes something entirely different. It becomes our map of Munich, or it becomes the map of Munich right now, on a snowy, windy winter afternoon. And that's a very different picture of Munich. Also, probably your picture of New York, it's like a pirate map, right? It's only a small piece. So I think that's, when we talk about design also, especially if service design, it's an interesting aspect. How does all of us using this at the same time actually change the kind of things we can build?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question. We think a lot about that in terms of a lot about who our users are, and also how do you translate. And I'm not trying to parse words here, but there's needs and then there's desire. And we recognize that there's things that you want to create that's aspirational, that things that you haven't even thought about or didn't know that was really important. The idea that you need to share a photo instantaneously, that wasn't possible, a couple years ago even, and now it is. And how do you bring those desires and bring it to life and make it more relevant? I think that's the job of trying to figure out how the hardware and the software and the services all come together. And so we touched a lot about group communications, sharing, but I think another area that's kind of interesting is this, back to the context of the world around us. In this room, how do we connect more or more deeply, and how do we have those conversations richer and be able to share even within this context? I think those are the ideas that we're thinking about, that sharing, it's not just about having one-way conversation, it's about groups, it's about context and location. That's what's going to fuel a lot of the great apps that's going to be coming out.
All right. I think we got time for one or two more. All right, in the back.
Morning. Lee Arthur from Dow Jones. I just wondered whether you had any advice for news or other content providers in terms of designing their own interfaces for the brave new world we're going to see.
I mean, you're asking an interface question. Albert's probably the better one to answer, but I think what we're certainly seeing is going to be, that's where I was talking about display technologies earlier. And I think that will, we've been waiting for curved LCDs or curved
Flexible display.
Flexible display, yeah, since we were in design school 15 years ago. Yeah, exactly.
Every design student has that project.
But even though it hasn't come as quickly as we wanted it to come, it will come, as have other technologies. And I think, obviously, e-paper is going to be something that will be very exciting and will influence the whole print media industry.
Yeah, I think actually I could spend hours on this topic, just one little topic, which is, and I think that's the success of apps. I think there was this with content creators, content providers. I think there was this kind of idea of consistency versus diversity in terms of applications. And if you look at the web was very open. You could make it whatever you want, and however you want it, how the interaction works, it's up to you. I think what the app world has shown, and application of content, has shown that creating a simple or consistent way to actually consume that content and that media, it actually makes it easier. And that's why you have 10 billion downloads of apps. Those are the things that we have to think about as designers about how do you actually take content and make it more consumable in a way that it's more relevant for consumers.
And actually, Framework is going to play an even bigger role in the future. Right now, you have the top apps, you have the New York Times, Spiegel, and so on. They'll create their own interfaces, right? But going forward, the question is, what's the equivalent of a blog, right? A blog is a very consistent kind of way of using it. So maybe I have a wizard, I have a generator for apps on my phone for everybody who just writes a blog, because they don't have $30,000. It's going to be good for the user too, because they don't have to relearn it every time, right?
Yeah, and the more we can do to think about how do you make that experience, and if there was 10 lessons learned from Iceland, there's 10 lessons learned about design for a platform. Is end user is number one, and then if you create great experiences, your business, your revenue, the rest of that will come. And the Facebook movies show you that, hey, start with a small group, make them really happy, and bring it to Stanford, obviously. And then that will grow. And those are the things that we can do to help make better experiences.
That was all fiction, though, right?
Oh, that's true, yeah.
Thank you, guys. I think our time is up. Thank you all for paying attention and listening, and I think we're done here.
Thank you so much, Fred. Thank you so much.